May 9, 2015. Red Square, Moscow. Vladimir Putin is watching the Victory Day parade from the reviewing stand when something happens that nobody planned. A T-14 Armata, Russia's new super tank, unveiled to the world for the first time this morning. The vehicle that state media has been calling the most revolutionary tank in a generation stops moving. In front of thousands of spectators, in front of the world's media, in front of Putin himself, the most advanced tank Russia has ever built breaks down in the middle of Red Square. A tow truck is dispatched. The tank is pulled off the parade route. Russian state television cuts away. The moment is captured on dozens of cameras and is on the internet within minutes. One British defense analyst who watches the footage calls it an augury. He means an omen. He is right. Over the next 10 years, Russia will pour billions of rubles into the T-14 program. It will promise 2,300 vehicles by 2020, then 1,000, then 100, then 20. It will deploy the tank to Ukraine briefly and then withdraw it. It will send it to Syria for a combat baptism and pull it back. It will parade it in Kazan when it disappears from the Moscow Victory Day parade entirely. And in 2024, the CEO of the state defense conglomerate Rostec will confirm on the record what Western intelligence had been saying for years. The T-14 Armata has never been deployed in Ukraine. The most advanced tank Russia has ever built is too expensive to risk losing, too unreliable to trust in combat, and too embarrassing to admit has failed. On paper, it is terrifying. In practice, it does not exist. To understand why the T-14 existed, you need to understand what Russia was trying to prove in 2015. The Soviet tank design tradition had produced the T-54, the T-62, the T-72, the T-80, the T-90, a lineage of vehicles that prioritized firepower, low profile, and mass production over crew survivability. Soviet tank doctrine accepted that crews would die. Tanks were expendable. You built more. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia watched as American Abrams tanks destroyed Iraqi T-72s in the Gulf War at kill ratios that the Soviet model had never anticipated. Russian tank designers understood what had happened. The T-72's low profile and autoloader, which had been considered advantages, became liabilities when the autoloader stored ammunition in a carousel around the crew compartment, and a single penetrating hit triggered catastrophic ammunition cook-off that killed everyone inside. The T-90 that followed was an upgrade rather than a redesign. The underlying architecture was still Soviet, still accepting crew deaths as an operational parameter. What Russia needed, its designers argued, was something genuinely different. A tank that protected its crew the way Western tanks protected theirs. A tank that could fight and survive in an environment where anti-tank guided missiles had proliferated to the point that any vehicle without active protection was tactically obsolete. The T-14 was that argument made in steel. The design that emerged from Uralvagonzavod, the state manufacturer at Nizhny Tagil, was genuinely radical by Russian standards. The crew of 3 commander, driver, gunner sat inside an armored capsule in the hull, completely separated from the unmanned turret above them. In previous Soviet and Russian tanks, the crew occupied the turret alongside the ammunition. In the T-14, the turret was a remote-controlled weapon station with no human being inside it. If a round penetrated the turret, nobody died. The crew capsule was surrounded by multi-layered composite armor that Russian sources claimed could withstand a direct hit from any round currently in existence. The Afghan active protection system used radar to detect incoming anti-tank missiles and counter-projectiles to destroy them before they reached the hull. The 125mm 2A8021M smoothbore gun was a new weapon rather than an adaptation of existing Soviet artillery, with a claimed penetration capability that exceeded the NATO 120mm standard. The fire control system incorporated thermal imaging, automatic target tracking, and the ability to fire laser-guided missiles through the main barrel. On paper, the specifications were extraordinary. On paper, the T-14 was what Russia said it was, the most revolutionary tank design in a generation. The first problem was the engine. The A85-3A turbocharged diesel produced approximately 1,200 horsepower, more than enough for the 55-ton vehicle. But the engine had been designed first, and the tank had been designed around it rather than the other way around. This sequence produced a vehicle whose engine bay was optimized for a specific power plant that proved extremely difficult to maintain, prone to overheating, prone to excessive oil consumption, and dependent on components that Western sanctions made increasingly difficult to source after 2022. The alternative was the proven V92 S2F diesel used in the T90, more durable, more reliable, better understood by Russian mechanics across every workshop in the country. But the V92 S2F was too large for the hull that had been built around the A85-3A. The only engineering solution, as one analyst put it, was to start again. Russia was not starting again. Russia was already committed to a production run that was falling further behind schedule with every passing year. The second problem was cost. The T-14 is an impressive tank built by a country that does not have the means to produce it in large numbers. When the program was announced in 2015, the unit cost was approximately $3 to $4 million, roughly comparable to a Western main battle tank. By 2019, Russian media were reporting costs of between $8 and $10 million per vehicle, with some estimates placing the figure higher once the full development overhead was included. The T-90M, which was already in production and already understood, cost approximately $4.5 million. Russian commanders were being asked to choose between one T-14 and two T-90Ms. They kept choosing the T-90Ms. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022 and immediately began losing armored vehicles at rates that shocked Western analysts, the T-14 program was quietly frozen as resources were diverted to replacing the T-72s and T-80s that were burning in Ukrainian fields. In November 2022, reports emerged that the state program under which the T-14 was being developed had been halted because the invasion had necessitated radical changes to planned expenditure for urgent needs. The third problem was trust. The first batch of T-14s delivered to the Russian army was reportedly rejected by commanders because the vehicles were in such poor condition. UK Defense Ministry officials noted the tank had been dogged by delays and manufacturing problems, and that any deployment would likely be for propaganda purposes since Russian commanders were unlikely to trust the vehicle. This assessment proved accurate. In 2023, armored forces from Russia's southern military district were given T-14 Armata tanks for combat operations. Several units participated in battle to see how the tank would perform. They were then withdrawn from the front line. The withdrawal was rapid enough that Western analysts inferred the performance had been suboptimal. No footage of T-14s in actual combat was released. No confirmed kills were attributed to the vehicles. The deployment that was supposed to prove the tank's worth instead confirmed the doubts that had been accumulating since 2015. The fourth problem was visibility. Russia's defense export business, which had been generating between $12 and $15 billion annually before 2022, depended on reputation. The T-14 was supposed to be the flagship export, the vehicle that would attract the customers that the T-90 was already losing to Chinese and South Korean competition. A T-14 destroyed in Ukraine, burning in a ditch, photographed and posted across Western intelligence channels and social media, would devastate the export program, not just for the T-14, but for the entire Russian defense brand. Moscow knows that it is very likely Ukrainian forces with their Western anti-tank systems would have a field day against the T-14 Armata. Footage of smoldering T-14 Armata tanks in the fields of Ukraine would damage its marketability to foreign customers, so Russia kept it back. The tank that was supposed to be too advanced for Ukraine to stop was kept away from Ukraine because Russia was not confident it could survive. The irony accumulated with every passing month. While T-14s sat in depots in Nizhny Tagil, Russia was sending T-55s and T-62s, vehicles designed in the 1940s and 1950s, to the front lines in Ukraine. Vehicles that museums in Western countries had turned into park ornaments were being reactivated, repaired, and driven into combat because Russia had run out of modern tanks to replace the ones Ukraine was destroying. The most advanced tank Russia had ever built, watched from the sidelines as the oldest tanks Russia still possessed were fed into a war that the T-14 had been designed to win. As of 2025, the T-14 was missing from the Moscow Victory Day parade for the first time. Its last public appearance was at the parade in Kazan. Many analysts believe the project has been paused indefinitely, if not completely cancelled. The specifications remain impressive on paper. The unmanned turret remains a genuinely innovative concept. The Afghan active protection system, if it works as described, represents a meaningful step beyond what older Russian tanks could offer. The 2A-82-1M gun is a real improvement over the 2A-46M it replaces. None of this is fiction. The T-14 is not a fake tank, it is something more troubling. A real tank that Russia cannot build in numbers, cannot afford to lose, cannot trust in combat, and cannot admit has failed. Delays in production, skyrocketing costs, and promises the Kremlin cannot deliver on are making the T-14 something of a joke. On paper, it is an amazing piece of military hardware, but in reality, it is an ambitious project the Kremlin has repeatedly failed to deliver on. May 9, 2015, Red Square. A tow truck pulling Russia's super tank off the parade route. A British analyst calling it an augury. 10 years later, the augury has proved correct. The T-14 Armata is the ghost at Russia's military feast. The weapon that was supposed to change everything, sitting in a depot while everything changes without it. 2,300 promised, 20 delivered, 0 deployed in the war it was built to win. The most terrifying tank on Earth, according to every specification sheet Russia ever published. The most absent tank on Earth, according to every battlefield Ukraine ever offered it. That is not an engineering failure. That is a story about what happens when a country promises a future it cannot build.